Good afternoon, guys. Welcome back again. Thanks for being here, and we have 4 minutes basically until class, so just getting the stream rolling for now. Hey Devin, how's it going? Hello Anthony, hey. Do I write? Yeah, I mean, I do as much as I can. Hey Peru, how's it going? Like, you mean professionally and stuff? Is that what you mean? Like, I've published some articles, I've published a book, but I don't know if that's what you meant. Hope you guys are having a good week so far. It's been pretty smooth over on my side. Oh yeah, I've written some books. Well, okay, I've co-edited one book and I wrote one of the chapters of it, but it's an anthology, so there's a lot of different authors in it. And I published some articles. So I mean, if you looked up my name and you looked for a search of my publication record, I have a couple things. 2 published articles in journals and then the book. So there's kind of like 3 things. But I mean, I could use that book for like an ethics class, but I wouldn't do that because it's just kind of a little bit, I think, too self-serving to do that. It'd be one way to try and make a little extra money off the royalties, but no one's ever going to buy that book that I published in 2014. It's just kind of, I don't know, towards the legacy, I guess. Wrong stream, Jonah? Really? When? Right now? Hi, Paul. Good to see you. Not to worry. Okay, guys, just a few more moments and we'll get started. Hi, Mateo, Austin, Tatsuma, Yuyen, everybody that's here. Welcome back. Good afternoon. Hi, guys. Okay, so it's 12:45 roughly, I guess now. So let's get things started. Welcome back again, everybody. As usual, whenever you get a chance, leave behind some type of comment there, and that'll just note your presence today. Okay, so the idea today is that we're just going to continue working through the notes on chapter 4. We got through some of it, but there's a lot more to go. I was going to ask some of you guys. So last time I was having an issue closing the stream. Oh, that's funny, Jonah. I see. I get what you mean. You're like looking at an old video, talking to a past version of me. It wasn't live. Well, that must have been an interesting experience. But anyway, welcome back. And this is definitely me live right now at what? 12:46 p.m. Pacific Standard Time, March 11th. Yeah, so anyways, good to be with you. Last time when we were having our meeting at the end after we finished everything, I was trying to close the stream to get the next one started for my 2:20 p.m. class, and basically, I think there was like a momentary Wi-Fi outage right as I hit end of the stream, and that meant that it was like disconnected and it didn't properly close. So I was like having all kinds of problems just making that stream end. I was trying to, end it properly so that it would archive it to the channel and upload, but I was running like into my next meeting, and I basically had to make a tough decision. So I just had to delete that video so that I could clear the queue and start another stream. Anyways, as I think I told you guys through my Canvas announcement after the class, because that class period for our section was deleted, I just sent you the lecture from the following group that's the same material and it's the same content. So you can refer to that video from the 9th if you ever want to review the notes from the last lecture that we had. So sorry that I had to delete the original, but it was just because of the glitch. Anyways, though, it's good to be back with everybody, and we continue through chapter 4. Because I had to delete that video, though, I kind of would like to ask your help remembering the last note that we covered, because I couldn't just go back to view it and pick up where I left off just looking at it. So I think I remember, though. Let's see if I'm right. So chapter 4 is all about knowledge and the limits of human knowledge. First thing that we talked about were, sorry, I just let the siren go past. These famous cases of medical error involving people who like amputated the wrong leg or gave too much of a dosage of blood thinning medication to little newborn infants. And it reminds us that we can always make errors in the processing of information. So you say unreliable sources of evidence. Okay, Noah, or right? Let me just get back to, I'll just bring you guys up to speed a little bit. After that, we talked about the definition of knowledge. Let me just ask anyone here to chime in with that definition. What's knowledge? It's a combination of 3 properties or features. What are the 3 criteria for having knowledge? To have knowledge, you have to have a what? 3 major factors go into the definition of knowledge. Let me just know one time, and then we can review that. Not all at once, but just let me know when you're ready. What is the definition of knowledge? Justification, truth, and more though, one more piece. And belief, right? JTB, good. So it's a justified true belief. That's what it is. The way it's kind of phrased in the book, information that we believe, which is true, and for which we have justification. So just a quick reminder about the basic features in that definition. For you to have knowledge, you have to think something's true, so you have to believe it. And that's not enough, though. If you have a belief but it's not correct, then of course that wouldn't be counted as knowledge, just like a person who gave wrong information answering a question on a test, So you have to have a true belief, but even more than that, you have to have a true belief, but it has to be based on some kind of reasons that you are aware of. Otherwise, you're getting it right, but just through random luck or chance. So real knowledge is having a belief which is true, so you think it's true and it does match the facts of reality. And also you have those facts and reasons that you could use to back it up. Hi, Ariana, not to worry, good to see you. So good you're with us. I'm just going through the review of some of the early notes last lecture. So that's what knowledge is. There are different viewpoints on where most human knowledge comes from. Some people hold the position they call empiricism, which thinks that most knowledge comes from the 5 senses and from observation using the 5 senses. So basically, knowledge is mostly derived from the things that you can physically interact with in some tangible way that you could see, taste, touch, hear, or smell. So physical evidence like that we have of dinosaurs having existed by recovering fossils, that's like empirical evidence, something that can be physically examined and observed. Empiricists think that's where most human knowledge comes from. On the other side, though, there are rationalists. Rationalism is the viewpoint that most human knowledge comes instead from just pure abstract ideas, reason, and thought. So when you're thinking about mathematical knowledge or geometric knowledge or trigonometric or pure logical knowledge, that would have nothing to do with the 5 senses. You can sit back and just think in the mind's eye about like math equations and geometric problems. And so some think that that's where most human knowledge comes from. I told you guys that I think they're both kind of vital and important to contributing to the full knowledge base that we have. Okay, then we talked about what evidence is and what are some basic sources of evidence that are generally relied on. So evidence is just anything that could prove or disprove a claim. the kind of facts or reasons that you might give to justify a belief of whatever kind. And some basic sources of evidence include direct experience, so like you perceiving something personally, being a witness to the thing. Another source of evidence is testimonial. That's evidence that arrives to you through the report that others relay to you from their experiences or from what they have heard. So testimony is another major source of evidence. Clearly, we cannot always be present to see and witness everything that happens. So we sometimes rely on the testimony of other people. Sometimes those are just everyday people in our lives. Sometimes they're experts. Sometimes those are sources that are official or media sources. Testimony is another basic source of reasoning for belief. And then there's memory. Memory is really kind of just like the recording in the mind of previously perceived or attested to information. So of course, without memory, you'd always be at a loss to preserve the evidence that you've accumulated from whatever source before. But thankfully, we have those memories, and that allows us to retain evidence for later use. And then there's inference, which is when you draw conclusions from other related facts, like seeing footprints or fingerprints, and then inferring the identity or the fact that someone has committed a crime. That's not the same thing as seeing the person do it or hearing about it or having a memory of a previously heard about or witnessed events, but just drawing conclusions from other reasons. Okay, so evidence is stronger when you have multiple sources that all kind of corroborate each other. When evidence sources conflict with each other and point in different directions, that's when you have to make choices about which is the more reliable, because if they say opposite things, they cannot both be true. Okay, after that, we talked a little bit about some unreliable sources of evidence, and we talked about false memory too, I think. So false memory is just what can sometimes happen with our memories, which requires that we be a little bit more willing to harbor doubt or at least some degree of skepticism about the full accuracy of each memory. It's when you think you can remember something or you appear to have a memory of something that did not actually happen or didn't happen the way that you thought it did. Sometimes we can confabulate things. Sometimes we can omit details because they've been lost through memory. Sometimes the use of language can shape the way that people appear to remember facts in the past. So knowing that it's one of the leading causes of mistaken conviction in law gives us some basis to have at least reasonable doubt in some cases where memory is involved. And then we talked about hearsay and anecdote, and I guess that's probably where we did end, right? So two other unreliable sources of evidence. Hearsay is evidence that you receive as testimony, but the problem is that it's passed through several other people before it makes its way to you. So sort of like the telephone game, which I was describing, when information passes through many different people before it arrives to you, it's usually degraded in quality. Either details have been eliminated or some have been added. So you always want to try and find better sources of evidence, if possible, than just hearsay. And then there's anecdote. Anecdotal evidence is evidence that's based on personal testimonies and one person's personal experience. But the problem is that if it's only based on one person's personal experience, it might not be fully representative of what the general case is. Like I told you, say a person told you coronavirus is not deadly because they know someone that got it who was recovering fast and didn't have any main problems with it. But that would be an anecdotal piece of evidence. If you looked at the larger share of cases, you'd see that it does have potential to be quite deadly in many cases. And so just randomly choosing one and cherry picking that as your anecdote would not be the most solid evidence possible. So sometimes people use anecdotes because, you know, when you have personal testimonies that you can draw on, either from your own or from other people's experience, it seems like you can relate to it and it's something real. But you always have to remember that a single one-off case cannot always be reflective of broader patterns that are often seen. So that's unreliable sources, hearsay, and anecdote. And we continue from there. So the next thing that's in Chapter 4 to add to our list of notes is, well, what if you're interacting with experts? A good source of evidence or information, if you can get it, is to just talk with or interview even an expert who's a specialist in some type of field. And if an expert's testimony contradicts what you've heard through anecdotal or hearsay evidence, then you would probably prioritize reliance on the expert's testimony over those other sources. But when we seek out experts, it's fair to point out that not all experts are equal. And some people make claims of expertise that are not fully well borne out by an analysis of what they really are specialists about. So Since not all experts are equally reliable on the topic that they claim expertise about, and since you have to make judgments, and in some cases, two relative experts will disagree, and you have to make some kind of determination who's the more worthy of credibility, then we should consider at least 4 different factors about experts that can help us to weigh the level of credibility to assign to their views. So let's say these are 4 factors to consider about experts. Okay, so one thing is education. And all we're talking about here is you want to take into account what kind of education this person has, to what level of attainment, and from where. Okay, so obviously educational attainment is one clear marker of how much of an expert someone is on a given subject. So if a person, let's say, has a professional certificate, a bachelor's degree, master's degree, PhD, etc., the higher up we go on the educational attainment scale about that subject matter that they're an expert on, then the more credible in general the person's views should be seen to be. Obviously, you know, these advanced degrees, bachelor's degree, master's, PhD, the kind of stuff that everyone's working towards in their education, they're not just handed out on the street corner to anyone that wants it. You have to really pay your dues. You have to prove your ability academically. You know, you guys are in the midst of that, being evaluated all the time and trying to show and prove that you're knowledgeable on these different subjects. So anyone who's passed through the gauntlet of those kind of educational requirements is going to attain some expertise. So the more, the better. But it's not just how much education, it's also at what kind of institution, because not every institution has an equal kind of academic record or reputation. Some places are fully accredited institutions with amazing reputations, and then other places are not fully accredited, and there's like online schools, for-profit colleges. Some of these places don't carry the same kind of reputation and esteem that you would get at a place that has like a brick and mortar campus. So also you want to take into account not just the kind of degree the person has or claims to have, but from where and what kind of school it was. So knowing the person's level of education can help you make distinctions between comparable different experts. But education is just one of these factors to consider. You can also, for example, consider the level of experience the person has. Experience is distinct from education because sometimes there are people who have a lot of experience in a field or profession with not a lot of formal education. And the opposite is sometimes true. Tons of formal education, but fresh out of grad school, no professional experience yet. So on top of educational attainment and the status that you have in what school, there's also how long have you worked within the field as a professional doing that type of work. So if the person's been out there for a long time and they have a long track record of professional experience to add to the level of education, it's just another metric that can weigh in the balance of your estimation of how much credibility to give to their words and views. So education, experience. There's also reputation. Okay, so, and also about experience. Sometimes a person's experience won't be in a field that's relevant to the thing that they're claiming expertise on. And so that's also important. Take, for example, with the whole coronavirus, there was this radiologist, Dr. Scott Atlas from Stanford. And because he was willing to parrot the views of the President Trump that maybe we were going too far with masking and distancing, we should just open everything up, get to herd immunity faster. Well, he was expressing these views, but he's not, an infectious disease specialist. So he has a lot of education. He's a doctor, but the experience that he has is not the right kind of relevant experience. So it's not also just how much experience, but is it relevant to the topic that you profess expertise in? Because you have two experts, Fauci, Atlas, they're not saying the same things. So who do you defer to? Well, you might consider who has relevant experience in the field under which they're making these statements. Reputation is the next, okay? Reputation meaning how is this person viewed by other professionals within that same domain of expertise? Is this person looked at as an upstanding member of that academic or professional organization or field? Or is this person regarded rather as like a outlier, a marginal figure, outside the mainstream or whatever. Knowing the reputation that the person has, if you sort of just look at kind of reports from others within the field, will also help you to gauge how much you should rely on them. And then finally, we've got accomplishments. Accomplishments meaning, does the person have awards, titles, honors, or publications that add further weight to their view and testimony? So, of course, if someone has a bunch of a thick publication record and maybe like academic awards and honors, then that, of course, enhances the validity of the things they say. You know, it's a stronger resume in that case. And so that's just another metric to add to your evaluation of relative experts. So anyway, it'd be nice in the world if every expert just all agreed and we didn't have any judgment of our own to engage in. But the world's a little more complicated than that. And even though there usually is expert consensus in, you know, the big scientific and academic fields, there's always room for debate and disagreement. I mean, experts, for example, can't seem to come to a clear consensus on a couple of scientific questions. And when they don't, sometimes it's frustrating for us because you have competing studies in some cases and you just don't know which one to defer to. Like, for example, is a glass of wine each night healthy for cardiovascular health? I've seen some studies, maybe you've heard of those studies, which say, sure, in moderate amounts, it actually can assist the functioning and the well-functioning of your heart. Other people, though, in other studies, different research institutions, different methodologies, come up with different findings, saying, no, that's actually incorrect, and you're better off overall with your baseline health if you never drank alcohol at all. So is it something that is conducive to good health, heart health, in limited amounts or not? If you see two studies which contradict each other, then you have to start to dig into, you know, the methodology and the level of expertise that you give to either of the two sides. Does milk help maintain strong bones and prevent osteoporosis? I've heard studies that say yes and others that say no. Is coffee drinking something that could be unhealthy because of its caffeinated content, or does that actually contribute to health? And so sometimes studies of these kinds don't find only one result, or at least even if one study does, it's contradicted by others that are out there. So anyways, also when you evaluate evidence, try to find the best high quality evidence and know that the credibility is higher if it's confirmed by other evidence as well. Know that sometimes confirmation bias can cause you to accept a lower standard of proof. Like if you're hoping that if you love wine and you're a big wine drinker, then you might have a bias in favor of preferring the studies that say that wine has good health properties. And so the first study that you see somewhere that's put out by any institution, you're like, look, I'm latching onto that, and now I've got the evidence that I need. So don't allow confirmation bias to lead you to accept a lower standard of proof or evidence. You know, have high standards of evidence regardless of whether it's a favored hypothesis or not, because the end goal is to get to the truth, not to just somehow arrange your belief system in such a way that there are no challenges to the things that you already assume are true. Okay, so next up, we're going to talk a little bit about what are some resources that you can use when you're trying to discover information to build knowledge on whatever the topic is. Where are some good places to go for the purposes of research? So it's labeled in the book as research resources. And that's the point here. We'll talk about where are some legitimate and solid sources that you can refer to in doing research. Okay, so now, of course, this textbook does not assume the existence of a global pandemic, so some of these resources, I don't know, might be more or less accessible in our current status, but they start off with a reference to the library. And in better times, you know, a library is a great place for you to find information for the purposes of research, not just because they have a ton of items in their catalog, but also because you can request material usually from an interlibrary loan system. Usually when you're working with a public or university school system library, they have access to a broader collection than just what they house in their own walls, and they can request those and have them delivered. So the library is a great place to find material of any kind. Also, it's free, you know, it's a great resource, time-honored institution, a place where people can study and benefit from all the collected wisdom and knowledge without having to pay a fee for access to the books. And, you know, when we can all gather and go to public buildings, like we hope will happen again soon in the next years, it's also a great place to study. You know, I remember being at Orange Coast College and sometimes going into the big library there and grading, and it's a nice place, very quiet. You know, it's an academic feeling because you're surrounded by books, so it helps you to kind of get in that mode of studying. So anyway, a library is a great place to go for the purposes of research if you have one. Hopefully you do, or someday you will. If not the library, there's also academic journals. Academic scholarly journals. So no matter what topic you're interested in, science, medicine, philosophy, history, literature, art, there are academic journals devoted to every possible subject area under the sun. And these academic journals are written by professionals and specialists in the field. And for these essays and papers to make it into the academic journal, they have to go through the peer review process. And as a professor and an academic myself, I published a couple things, and the review process, it goes into a referee, and then they give you back an acceptance or a rejection. Sometimes they ask you to make modifications to it before they'll make a decision. In other cases, they'll reject it outright. But the rejection rate is very high. So that pretty much ensures that it's only the highest quality content that has passed through this gauntlet of peer review and criticism to find its way onto the printed page of these journals. So anything that you read in an academic journal is going to be thoroughly vetted and already have been evaluated thoroughly on its way there. Where to find academic journals, Devin? Is that your question? Well, one place to go is you can subscribe to them online for, sometimes there's a subscription fee. In other cases, you can request them from libraries, given that the library is accessible. So there's online access, there's physical access through school libraries. And I mean, you could also, I guess, in the old school days, like send them a check in an envelope and receive it in the mail. But the most common access point would be, I think, through a library system. There's also JSTOR, which is like a compendium of published academic journals, the material that's accessible to students and faculty. And sometimes if you have a student login through your institution, you can gain access to jstor.org or .com. Yeah, JSTOR is a big one, Prue, you know that, and it seems like you know another major website, which I've not yet heard of, but I take your word for it, EBSCOhost. So yeah, a lot of stuff that's academic and is professional writing has been put out through these different sources. The thing about it though, one thing to know, just to be fair, is that it's very sometimes high level. This is stuff that's written by specialists, kind of for an audience of fellow specialists. It's not really written toward the general public. So sometimes it's a little bit high level and technical, but if you're willing to cut your teeth on some of that difficult material and you want the absolute state of the art in a given academic field, then that's always a good place to go. So scholarly academic journals. There's also government documents. Okay, so when you're doing research, sometimes you want to know facts and figures that are subject to the jurisdiction of a government agency. And so, living in a system, in a democracy like ours, we benefit from having a whole host of important government agencies whose whole job is to disseminate to the public information about the agency under their purview. So like if you want to know stuff about labor statistics, you can find that from the Bureau of Labor Statistics. Or if you want to know about crime data, then you can consult Department of Justice statistics that are made available to the public. If you want to know facts about what's going on environmentally, the Environmental Protection Agency would have information that's also accessible to the public. So, we have a lot of agencies that are tasked with the duty of providing information to the public for public consumption. A lot of times that's available on the government agency's website. Sometimes there's also government documents that reach the public through declassification or through leaks to the media. So sometimes I see a lot of that leaked or declassified material on one website I use called scribd.com. I don't know if anyone's ever heard of it, but they also have an app. So sometimes I'll go there if I'm trying to see like interesting stuff that's been either declassified or leaked. Now, of course, if you're living in a society where the government was totally corrupt, then you might worry about political influence corrupting the objectivity of the evidence that these agencies are trying to give you. Like people would worry that is there political interference that causes like a public health agency to relax social distancing requirements too quickly or something. But for the most part, in the United States, we have career professionals that staff all these government agencies. They're not like loyal necessarily to one or the other administration or political party. So for the most part, the independence of our important agencies endures on. So with some exceptions and with those little caveats, we should be feeling confident and willing to take access to that resource that we have, government documents. Okay, so there's also the internet, which, it's probably the most obvious and common for especially younger people. You can always, if you're interested in something online and doing research on it, it's always just a Google search away, I guess. And then you can go down the rabbit hole and find more and more links trying to really do further research. The only issue about internet research, though, is that it's self-directed, and there's also a lot of false and unreliable and sensationalist information on social media and on various blogger websites and stuff like that. So a person can get sucked into a kind of feedback loop where their algorithms of these social media feeds are serving them content that they already want to see. So like on YouTube, they just keep seeing conspiracy theory videos because they've already clicked on so many of them. And the more clicks that the website gets, the more revenue they get for ads. So when you're doing internet research, you kind of have to make sure that you don't veer off the rails into like conspiracy theories, satire. Sometimes people even take what's not intended as factual information as literal information. There's like satirical websites, and sometimes like The Onion and stuff, people don't know that these are just jokes and they think that it's an actual headline. So you have to make sure that you're looking at content that's intended to be real, that does not come from a person with an ideological or financial agenda to promote. And so in a way, even though the internet is a solid and viable source of information, we have to be digitally literate consumers of information we find there. Otherwise, it can kind of cancel out the value we have. Oh, I'm sorry, Noah. Yeah, just kidding. Yeah, just go to The Onion for your information. No, yeah, you guys know The Onion, right? It's a satirical website. I'm sure that you know that, but look, people say stuff online, like they'll read stuff from the Babylon Bee, which is like a kind of satirical conservative website, another thing that people sometimes take to be real news. I've seen political leaders like Ted Cruz retweet an article from Babylon Bee complaining about the headline on the assumption that it was real. So even if it may be like LOL, who would ever think that that's real? Prominent people have sometimes done that. So much more accomplished they must seem to the general citizen than just us everyday people, but still they're making these mistakes. Okay, so the internet. There's also expert interview. Expert interview, if you have access to experts, and I guess as students, you guys do have that access, your professors in your various classes are at least expert with respect to the topic that they're responsible for teaching in school. So when you have a chance to sit down and pick the brain of an expert, if you're allowed to take notes, that's always great. And if you have a recording device, that's also a nice kind of resource to keep the facts clear and memorable into the future. And also, though, note a quote where needed. If you're referring to expert interviews, sometimes you want to cite the fact that you guys talked. Okay. Now, when you find a piece of information for research or just for your own interest from any of these different sources, you can even go into a little further bit of analysis as to the quality of that individual piece of information. And so the textbook gives us a little 5-point method to use when we evaluate the quality of a piece of info. And it wants us to think of these 5 points in the framework of an acronym, to make it memorable. But this is a little bit of an awkwardly labeled acronym, so I'm just going to tell you it's called the CRAP test, okay? CRAAP. This is not me, this is from the book, but maybe it's memorable that way. So here, let's talk about the so-called CRAP test. Okay, so first of all, each letter, as acronyms go, stands for a different word, which can be thought of as a way of evaluating information. Okay, so what's letter C stand for in this acronym? It's for the word currency. And with currency here, we don't mean it in the sense of like financial currency, dollar bills, but rather the word in the other sense of how current something is, how current the information is, how up to date. One issue to keep in mind is that when people use evidence to justify their views, sometimes they're relying on outdated evidence that no longer is relevant to the debated question or the topic. So suppose like someone is telling you there's no such thing as global warming. Here, just look at this data. I'm showing you meteorological data between the year 1900 and 1950. And if you look at this graph, you see that there's no significant increase in global temperature over that whole 50-year period. So how can you tell me there's really global warming? Look at those pieces of data. What's the problem there? I mean, the problem is that the global warming issue really has only kind of come to the surface of consciousness in the latter portion of the 20th and now early portion of the 21st century. If you look at graphs that show global temperature since we started keeping records back in the 1850s, all the global temperature records have been broken since the year 2000, and we've had like 5, 6 of the hottest years ever just in the last decade. So you wouldn't see that if you looked at this outdated information that doesn't include the past century or at least past 70 years. So it would be outdated and not current enough to speak to the issue. Sometimes I see people on social media engaging in debate and argument and linking to articles while they're making a political argument, but about an administration 2-3 administrations ago. So it's out of date and it's not relevant to the current day. Usually, in general, the more current, the better for evidence and for information, unless, of course, you're actually studying something that is a historical episode where the only possible evidence is not contemporary. But in other cases, you know, currency matters. Okay, so next up, the letter R for relevance. And with this, we're just talking about, is the information that you're citing relevant to the topic that you're trying to study? One basic thing that can easily invalidate a piece of information is if it's not related to the topic that you're interested in pursuing study on. Like if someone said, we seem to be having all these more powerful hurricanes in the last 30 years. And if you look at the divorce rate over those 30 years, it's been slowly creeping up. Now it's almost like 50% divorce rate. Half of married couples will end in divorce. So maybe these two things are connected. You know, there's more people getting divorced. We're getting worse hurricanes. So maybe the divorce rate's driving the hurricane season. I don't know. That would not be a very good way of reasoning, because obviously one thing is a social fact that can't be relevant to, I don't know, meteorological events. I mean, I'm sure you could dream up some possible causal connection, but in general, let's just be reasonable. That's not relevant. So we would write off and discard evidence if it didn't have any bearing on the topic, you know, realistically. Next up, 2 letters A. You've got authority. Okay, so authority just meaning who gives this information and what authority do they have to pronounce on this topic? Is this a person with some kind of qualified professional status or education on the topic? Or is this just like a blogger with a big opinion and a fancy looking polished website? In the world we live in, sometimes something that's not professional or academically sourced can present itself in a website, for example, just as clean and professional as like mainstream journalistic website. But the question really is, who are the people that have created the site, the information, or done the research? Authoritative expertise is definitely important, and so you want to know that you're getting the information from someone who knows what they're talking about, basically. The second letter A is for accuracy. I feel like, in a way, it's almost redundant to put that in the sort of 5-point criteria, because obviously if it's not accurate, then it's not valuable at all. But accuracy, how credible, truthful, and factual is the information given? Like I said earlier, is it even attempting to pose or present itself as legitimate information and real facts, or is it satirical? Is it put out there to just drive gossip or to become a trending topic? You know, so accuracy is, of course, fundamental, and you might want to check against available fact-checking sources to further investigate that, like Snopes or whatever other fact-checking websites, PolitiFact, and all that. Those are like nonpartisan fact-checking websites, which just basically tell you when a claim that's been made either by a media member, political figure, or whoever is something that checks out with other information that we know. And then letter P stands for purpose. that is asking this question: what is the reason the information was given? Why does this information exist? Has it been disseminated merely to inform and to educate? Is it just got that kind of basic virtuous epistemic purpose? Or is it instead intended to sell a product or to advance an ideological agenda or whatever? I have some people in my life that I really care about a lot. I guess I shouldn't name them or anything, but in some cases, I feel like I've got some gullible loved ones because, like, I know someone who will jump on the newest diet trend, whatever elimination diet is out there. This person wants to try it. They just want to see how it helps their health and wellness. And to me, I always, look at what they're doing with a lot of skepticism because I feel like they just hop on these trends. And in one case, the person's trying to tell me, well, you think this isn't true? Just look, this is like a professional. They've got a website, they've got a YouTube channel, and they'll promote the claims and explain them in more scientific detail there. So I check out the site, and you see that this person's trying to sell a diet plan or a book, So it's not just like, hey, I'm a medical professional and I want people to be healthy. It's like, check out my TED Talk and then buy my book and then buy the diet plan that goes with the book. And it's telling you to eliminate everything from your diet except for like potatoes or something, and I'm supposed to take that seriously. So when someone has a vested financial interest in the information they're providing, it's not to say that it's totally to be discredited, but it's something that you should bear in mind because when people have a bottom line financially behind the thing that they're promoting, then of course they're not necessarily going to be as objective if there are reasonable counter evidence or debate about it. So anyways, guys, crap test. When you're looking at information which you have derived from whatever source you're using, evaluate it against these different criteria to see whether it's really the sort of stuff that you should continue to use as evidence. Okay. So there we're good for that. And next, the next section of notes from chapter 4 talks about what are called cognitive and perceptual errors in thinking. So we want to have knowledge, but what prevents us from getting there sometimes are the mental mistakes that we ourselves can make. And knowing what these common cognitive and perceptual errors are, either errors in perception or errors in thinking, knowing what they are allows us to be a little bit more self-aware of them and to sort of check ourselves against the possibility of making those mistakes. So we're going to get into a full range of so-called cognitive and perceptual errors. But to set off the discussion of those topics, the textbook uses another reference to a historical episode to kind of generate interest in the topic. So they mentioned to us the War of the Worlds broadcast. I want to talk to you about that just a little bit. Okay, so the War of the Worlds broadcast, kind of like an infamous episode in radio and television history, but this is before television, just before. So this is October 30th of 1938. That's when the broadcast happened originally. Now, I don't know if this is a well-known enough episode in American history for some of you to be aware of it already. But Jonah, you learned about it, so maybe you can tell us a little bit. I'll elaborate on it, but what's your basic memory, or anyone else, if you know about it? What was this War of the Worlds broadcast? What happened? Why are we still talking about it? Anyone can tell me. Jonah, I think you might know, but if anyone else knows, just your quick summary or whatever, and then I'll try to fill in more details if I can. War of the Worlds broadcast? Any takers? Just let me know. Or if you've never heard of it, that's fine. Just let me know you've never heard of it. Sometimes I like to check on where your background knowledge is and then sort of like meeting you in the middle, or am I starting from scratch? Okay, so Jonah, you say, waiting for size. It's funny, I get the comments first on my phone, so I'm looking over here sometimes, and then they pop up on my desktop or laptop. Okay, so Jonah, I forgot his name, but he broadcasted a story or script on the broadcasting station, and everyone believed that aliens were invading. That's pretty much true, yeah. So you got the basic details. Let me add a few things just to give the context. So the year is 1938. It's October the 30th. Television sets are not yet in the American household. That's like a decade away pretty much after World War II. So right now, if it's the 1930s, what do people, American households, use to listen to news, sports, entertainment, sitting around, you know, in the evening after they've eaten dinner and stuff? It would be the radio. Okay, so the radio was the main staple of American households. If you wanted to tune into the radio station and you know, hear the broadcaster, sometimes a broadcaster is reporting news. Sometimes a broadcaster is doing color commentary for sports, like, oh, he just hit it out of the park, you know. Stare at the radio. I guess I mean, you might not stare at it, but you'd be listening to it, whatever. You could look anywhere. But yeah, and in other cases, there would actually be entertainment broadcasts. So what that would be like voice acting of a plot that was given in a novel or something. So there was this Orson Welles novel, I think he's the author. It's a science fiction story, and it was called War of the Worlds. There's actually been a film, or a couple films, I think, made about it, but the most recent one had Tom Cruise, like maybe 15 years ago. Anyway, War of the Worlds was a novel, and the plot line was Martians had come from planet Mars to invade Earth, and they're taking us over and attacking us in their flying saucers. Now, this War of the Worlds story was being given as a entertainment voice acting play, like a broadcast on the radio. And some people tuning into it, I guess, did not recognize that it was just for entertainment purposes, and they confused it with a real news broadcast. So essentially, because of their mistaken impression that it was real news, a lot of people got into a panic, and some people even reported having like visual perceptions that were illusions just because of how highly suggestible their mental state was. So you got people saying stuff like, whoa, look on the horizon. Can you see? I think that's it, actually. That's one of those flying saucers right now. It's coming. And who knows what they're really seeing, like a glint of light, like a distant object that's sort of framed in their field of vision that they could think of somewhat vaguely as a flying saucer. I've heard some reports about the events that said that some people, even maybe mentally ill or maybe just already depressed, committed suicide because they thought that this was a credible news report. Now, some of that has since been shrouded in debate, how much of the original events were like total hysteria or how much of that is embellished in the generations that have passed. Whatever, some isolated cases for sure of misapprehension of flying saucers and the belief that they were really happening did exist. So what moral of this story can we take away? The way the book frames it is that it shows that our perception of the world can easily be distorted by our social influences. You know, so if no one would have been listening to the radio that night, that social influence, nobody would have thought, hey, Martians are attacking, it's time to panic, right? So it's kind of like the mind itself can latch onto false ideas, and sometimes we can be placed into a heightened state of suggestibility if we don't check ourselves against the propensity to make cognitive errors and errors in perception. Sometimes we rely too uncritically on our first impressions or assumptions, and so we need to study and understand what some of these common cognitive and perceptual errors are so that we can try better to screen them off. Not to say that we'll be perfect with that, but we can always make some improvement. Okay, so cognitive and perceptual errors, jumping off from that example of War of the Worlds broadcast. Cognitive and perceptual errors then. So the mind, the brain, it's not exactly just a passive receptacle, receiver of information. The brain actually creates a picture of the world out of the raw material that is provided to it in sense data, kind of like how an artist will fill in gaps in an experience. An artist could like fill in the missing pieces in an incomplete painting or something. So sometimes the brain will filter out information that's deemed not important or necessary, and sometimes it can create missing information where it thinks there's a gap. So that leaves us with one of the first cognitive errors, which is the misperception of random data. Okay, so this error is basically when a person thinks or appears to see a pattern or an order in something which is in fact random and just meaningless. So when one thinks they see order, or a pattern, in something which is actually random. Misperception of random data. So the brain hates an absence of meaning or order. And so sometimes we will impose order or structure on something which in itself doesn't have any such order or pattern. Some simple, trivial examples of this could be like, take the case of a person looking at the clouds and with that kind of creative imagination that some have, saying, you know what, that cloud looks just like a school bus, or that cloud looks just like an elephant. Oh no, that one right there, it definitely looks like the Eiffel Tower. You know, so whatever. A person may see these shapes in the clouds, but obviously the cloud is not like a piece of artwork that's been made by any one or thing with some kind of artistic intent. It's the accumulation of water vapor in the Earth's atmosphere. And so this is random data which the mind creatively frames as something recognizable. We see other examples of cases sort of like that. The craters in the moon, kind of the discoloration in the crater structure on the moon, some will see as a face, the man on the moon. You've heard people say that in a discolored piece of toast or like a random piece of tree bark, someone sees a religious divine figure like a face of Jesus on a burnt piece of toast. Can other examples be given? Sometimes people say, where as they look at satellite images of a hurricane from space, that they think they can see the image of like a demonic figure, as though this is a message from God that he's punishing us. Or I've heard it also said in a pro-life advocate that they thought they could see a fetus in the image. And so this was a message to discontinue abortion by policy in the United States. Sometimes stress and fear can influence the tendency to misperceive random data as something structured. Maybe some of you have ever watched like a scary movie, and if you're that kind of person that can get a little jumpy or anxious afterwards, maybe walking around late at night in the dark, you kind of hustle a little faster to your car or wherever your house, as you see like the pattern of shadows cast about the walls kind of almost take on the likeness of like an imposing figure that might be out to get you. All eyes on me. What's the quote you're thinking of, Noah? I don't know, but you maybe will let me know. And children, obviously, the sort of stress and anxiety that little children have with their overactive imaginations can misperceive, you know, shadows cast about the wall in the bedroom as like, you know, monsters and other kind of scary images. So just know that the world doesn't always bear structure in every single case where the mind appears to see it there. And so we can make sure to not commit this error as often if we're just aware of that. Another of these errors mentioned just next is memorable events error. I'm still curious though, Noah, which Tupac quote are you thinking of? I was more of a Biggie person myself, but anyway. Okay, so the next one, we're talking about memorable events error. Okay, memorable events error. So one thing about the brain and mind is that we more easily remember things that stand out from the ordinary, that are unusual or uncommon. If I ask you right now, so the real men get up, you know, you're fed up, ladies, keeping your head up, things will be brighter and all that. I can't see how the reference connects, but you know, we'll get into it later, I guess. Look, memorable events error, as I was trying to say, we more easily remember things that are unusual, that are uncommon, or that stand out. Like, you could probably remember the things you were doing on your birthday because it's a special date, but if I ask you to tell me what you were doing randomly on like April the 5th of 2020, it would not be so easy for you to remember unless you go back and you kind of investigate like your social media accounts or your text messages or something. So in general, we more easily remember things that are uncommon, but this becomes an error when we assign more importance or significance to things than they deserve just because they stand out in our mind and they're uncommon. So let me write down that definition. This is when we place more importance or significance on something than it deserves just because it was uncommon.
So when we place more significance on something than it deserves, and why? Just because it's uncommon. So an example of this that the book mentions is, okay, what's more common for us to see and experience on a regular basis? Car accidents, on the roadway, or hearing a report of an airplane crash in one of our, in the aviation system. Well, car crashes happen all the time. They happen every day. And if you drive with any regularity, or even if you don't, even if you're just a passenger or a pedestrian, you definitely see car crashes on the regular. Me, for example, when I commute, or even when I'm just driving around, it's so routine to just see like a disabled car sitting off on the shoulder waiting for a tow truck, or sometimes even worse, a total smash up where the car is not drivable. I've seen some cases of cars on fire out there on the roads, like, geez, or in some cases it looked like a fatal accident. So we see car crashes all the time. It's actually one of the leading causes of death in the United States. So it becomes normal to us, essentially. It becomes something that we just take for granted. We're used to it. It's just an everyday thing. So we don't pay much attention to it or kind of care about it that much. We don't spend much time thinking about it because it's so normal and common. On the other hand, though, airplane crashes are highly unusual. Like, when's the last time you even remember a major plane crash from an American, airline crashing and all the people dying? We've had a couple of incidents in the past few years where there were some rough, bumpy landings. But for the most part, we've actually had some of the most safe and secure years of aviation in the whole industry's history in the past few years, in terms of just the number of people who've either died or become injured on planes. So I don't know if you know this fact, but it's been much discussed. You're actually at greater risk of death and injury driving in a car than you are flying in a plane. If you just simply take the denominator to be the number of people who use this mode of transport, and the numerator to be the number of fatalities. So no matter how you cut it, mile for mile, pound for pound, you're way safer up there in the air on the planes than you are on the ground driving in the car. But because plane crashes are so unusual, and it's like a big media event, and we pay much more attention to it when it happens because it is out of place and it's uncommon, we attach more significance to it than the car crash. And that ends up leading us to behave in a way that's not exactly rational, because we don't rationally proportion our fear to the actual nature of the threat. So what do people basically fear more, flying or driving? And I think you already know that people are much more anxious and apprehensive about getting on the plane. When people fly and you know them and you're the friend or something, or you're the one flying, you always hear this communication. Call me, text me, whatever when you get there. Message me when you land. But they don't say, message me when you get to the airport. I just want to make sure you made it to the airport safely. But you're actually likelier to die on the way to the airport driving there than on the plane ride that you take afterwards. Now, of course, as you guys are probably some thinking, well, crash for crash though, a plane crash is way more deadly than a car crash. Like, you can walk away from a car crash, and oftentimes people do. But even when you account for that factor, you're still safer pound for pound flying than driving. So memorable events here, just one example. Because the plane crash is so uncommon, we place more worry and concern on it than it deserves, just because it's uncommon. Yeah, especially near LAX. Yeah, tough airport to fly out of sometimes, but I guess it was a little better during the pandemic, going through the rotunda thing. I dropped some friends off. I didn't fly, but anyway. So another example I can think of is this. Take the case of the domestic mass shootings. Thankfully, it seems like those have calmed down a little bit with everyone locked down in quarantine. But of course, we've had way more deaths through the pandemic, so it's not exactly like a better status quo. Anyways, school shootings, mass shootings is really becoming a big problem, and hopefully we make progress on that issue. But they're happening with such frequency almost, especially over the past 10, 20 years, that we got kind of used to those. It's like, oh, another school shooting. Okay, well, just another day in America. What else is new? And so we kind of just become used to it and a little numb to it. But what's not so often happening, and what is a little more rare and uncommon, is like a terrorist attack from an international terrorist organization, like Al-Qaeda or ISIS or something like that. So that's rare, and when it happens, it consumes a ton of media attention. An attack by a foreign terrorist group against like an American or American people. But if you just think about the statistics, and this is just a total objective fact, it's one of the least likely ways for you to die is to die in a terrorist attack from a foreign organization. You're much, much likelier to die at the hands of a domestic shooter that's lost their mind and they're shooting in a public place for whatever, God knows what reason. So what are we changing our laws for and like giving up all our civil liberties for, to address the threat of international terrorism, not so much domestic gun violence, but you're at greater risk from your
crazy neighbor stockpiling weapons than you are from, third world, I shouldn't say third world, but international terrorist organizations that set their agenda against us. So once again, we are not proportioning our rational degree of concern to the level of threat. We're more afraid of the less risky thing, just as before in the other case. So anyway, try to have a objective estimation of how much concern or significance to place on things. Do not allow yourself to assign greater worry, concern, or emphasis on something that it deserves just because it sticks out in your mind. Okay, that's memorable events error. Okay, so we're moving on then to the next of the cognitive or perceptual errors. Listed next in the book is known as probability error. So probability error is, in a way, it's pretty straightforward. It's just when you assign the wrong estimate of the probability of an event. So when you miscalculate the probability of an event by a wide margin, that's the probability error. Probability error, an error in the estimation of the odds, the likelihood that something will happen. So there are basically two directions that a person can commit this type of error: an error of overestimation or an error of underestimation. So you can think that something is likelier to happen than it actually is. That would be overstating the odds or overestimating the odds. Or a person can think that something is less likely to happen than it actually is. And in that case, they make the probability error by underestimating the odds of the thing happening. So sometimes we commit this type of fallacy in the example of what is called the gambler's fallacy. Gambler's fallacy is just one interesting example of probability error applied to the case of gambling. So famously, when people gamble, they're sometimes not thinking reasonably. They get in the heat of the moment like, oh, I better double down on this bet, or I'm on a roll, or law of averages is about to hit. It's time to cash out. But if you're thinking about the probability of each bet rationally, then you can determine with pretty specific objective mathematical odds what the probability is. Let me give you one example, and then we'll switch to something that's a little more Vegas-like. So if I have a coin here, and I flip this coin, it's just a neutral coin, heads, tails, fair coin. CSGO cases, once again, your reference escapes me for the moment, but you'll either let me know more or I'll just have to think about it later. But take the case of the coin flip. If you flip this coin, tell me, guys, if anyone can figure this out, not too hard. What's the probability that it's going to land heads? A neutral, fair coin, I'm flipping it, coming up, down, down, down. What's it going to land? What's the chance that it's going to land heads? Just looking for some probability here. I'm serving you up a softball. It's easy. What do you think? It is 0.5. It's 50%. That's right. It's got two sides. One of those two sides is going to land. It's just as likely heads or tails. So it's 50%. So suppose I flip it, it lands heads. Okay, that's the first outcome. So I flip it again, it's heads again. 2 flips, 2 times heads. Flip it again, and heads comes down the third time. Okay, so we had 3 in a row heads. Now, before I flip it this 4th time, I'm going to ask you again, what are the chances that it's going to come down heads the 4th time? First 3 trials, heads, heads, heads. What's the chance of the 4th one being heads? Still 50%, yes. Okay, if you're answering in reference to my most recent question, yeah, it is still 50%. It's not like someone should be thinking this. Well, heads came up 3 times, so heads is on a roll. So I think it's actually much more likely now, given that the earlier 3 flips were all heads. Obviously, the probability associated with the current trial cannot have anything to do with any number of previous outcomes. So it's not like this current coin flip can take into account the number of times that heads or tails has arrived before. It remains 50-50 in each individual flip. Now, someone might be thinking another thought. Well, it's the law of averages, isn't it? If I flipped it heads 3 times, then it's bound to switch to tails now. So I should go with tails because tails is likelier than not. But tails is also 50% probable on the 4th trial. If what you're thinking, though, is that it's not going to be heads, heads, heads forever if it's a fair coin, true. So in the long run of time, we should expect that the ratio of heads to tails outcomes will converge towards a 50% ratio if you do it infinitely number of flips, right? But that would be to confound the probability of the series being 50-50 in the long run with the probability of an individual trial within the series. So for each individual trial of the coin flip, it's 50-50 either way. But sometimes if you were in a gambling situation, you might be thinking, oh, it's time to switch, it's time to stick with it, etc. So take the case of a roulette table bet. I don't know if you know anything about roulette. There's basically just red and black. So it's kind of 50-50 red or black. There are 2 green slots. So that's what makes it slightly better odds for the house, so that in the long run, they will always, the house always wins, and that keeps the casino profitable. But with that little caveat, red, black is a basically 50-50 proposition. So if you bet a bunch of money on red, you won. And you did it again, red came up again. You shouldn't be thinking, as a lot of people would if they're out there gambling, it's time to triple down on red because red's rolling. Or it's time to switch back to black because now the law of averages says it's due. So that's probability error as applied to some of these gambler's fallacy examples. Do I like the casino? Well, I'm not good with cards, and I know there's a lot of sharks out there that play that would probably just run me off the table. So slot machines is fun, I guess, sometimes. But I've never gone out there and blown a ton of money. A few times that I've gambled, usually I'd come away breaking even or taking a small loss. Casio, yeah, the old Casio watches and stuff. No, I don't have one anymore. But casino, anyway. That's one case of probability error. The textbook also mentions the fortuitous phone call as another kind of funny example of probability error. So has this ever happened to you? I know it's happened to somebody where you're thinking of somebody and you haven't talked to them in a while, and then right as you're thinking about them, how coincidental, they hit you up. They text you or send you a message or something. And if that happens, some people will start getting into supernatural type thoughts, whoa, how trippy, I thought of them, they texted me at that same exact time. What are the odds of that? There's just no chance that could happen unless we've got ESP going on, or our souls are connected and we've got mental kind of psychic connection with each other. Why would someone jump to this supernatural explanation? Because they think the odds of it happening on its own are just almost nil. But the reason the person is thinking that is because of all the other occasions on which they had a thought of a random person and nobody texted or called them. Those don't get remembered. They just get lost to your short-term memory because why would you remember an episode of thinking about someone and them not hitting you up? So because you discount all those other examples, you kind of aren't taking true measure of the denominator of this ratio. It's 1 over however many times nobody ever got back to you that you've forgotten. And if you see that in its true numerator and denominator, it's a much lower likelihood than you thought it had been. So that's the fortuitous phone call. Ears were burning. Paul, is this in reference to the supernatural connection that burns your ears? Again, it's a little obscure, these references, but it's okay. Here's one. Let's try this. This doesn't always work, and especially with a group this small, it probably might not work, but I'm willing to try. It's mentioned in the book as a funny little exercise. Oh, it's an idiom for someone knowing you were talking about them. Ah, okay. I add that to my knowledge just now. I've not heard that one, but I like to be as knowledgeable as possible, so I'll use it next time I have a chance. Here's the example. So I'm asking you guys about birth dates. So I'm looking at the number that we have in the room or the class meeting. It might not be enough for this to come off successfully, but if it does, it'll be pretty cool. So here's the question. Does anyone have a January birthday? If you do, list the date. And if you don't, then just say no. January birthday, that's the question. So I'm either going to see everyone saying no, or I'm going to see at least some people saying they have that birthday. But everyone got to reply. We all got to participate. So if you're watching this, just hit me back with the answer. Were you born in January? If so, what's the date? If not, just say no. So far I got
Some no's. No, 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 no. Okay, no problem. Nobody's January. No January people. Okay, so I'm taking it that we don't have any people from January, but that's fine. Let's move to the next month. Are there any, so if you did have a January birthday and you didn't write it, please list it, but otherwise we're moving to the next month. So February, any February people? February, yay, nay. If you have no February, say no to February, and if you do have a February birthday, write it down. February, February. Anybody recently have a birthday? Seeing some no's. We're gonna get through this though, so we gotta keep going, but you know, stick with me, let me know. No, no, no. Okay, all right. Looks like there's no Februarys. How about March? This is March. Anybody's got a birthday this month? If you don't have a March birthday, hit no. If you do have a March birthday, let me see what it is the date. March 20th, okay, Austin. I'm a March birthday myself. We actually are very close. Is it just me and Austin with March? Okay. There's another March, March 26th. Okay, Ian, Austin, and myself, 3 March people. And that's just us? Okay, we don't have a match yet. I'm trying to see if there's gonna be any people in this meeting right now that have the same birthday. And here's the thing. The reason this is used in the book as like an example is because the everyday person would assume that this is very unlikely because you think of your birthday as kind of highly idiosyncratic fact about you, that it's rare to meet someone with the same day birthday. But actually, when you have a classroom of a certain average size, like about 30 or so people, the odds of having a common birthday in that room, if you do the math, it's very high. It's above 50%. So I'm not sure if we have enough in this room for that to happen, but we'll find out. So moving on to April, because only 2 people have even had their birthdays noted so far, so I think we have a chance with all the remaining months. Any April people? But happy birthday to you guys, Austin and Ian. My birthday is next week on St. Patrick's Day, the 17th. So I guess we all have something to look forward to. April 20th, Anthony, 420. Who else? Nobody? Just Anthony? Anthony, the only one on April. Okay, it seems like we're going to get to some late spring and summer type birthdays, but that's fine. So I'm going to keep going. May? Who's got May? Anybody? Yes, so far 4 students have written that they had their birthdays. So there's been 3 so far, 2 March and 1 April. So I'm keeping track of the numbers. Okay, May 4th, Prue. Nice. Anyone else in there? May? No? Okay. May 12th. All right. Okay. June? 4th and 12th not there yet. June? June people? No? You know what? I think we can make it a little faster. How about this? Okay, well, let's see the Junes. Almost. June 20th and 23rd. Right there. Just a few days off, but not quite. So I guess we're moving on to July. Do you have a July birthday? Let me see here. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. Still no July. Okay, so how about this? For the remaining people who have not had their month called out, let me just see your birthday. Just type in the chat, when is your birthday? 1 July for Khan, July 9th. So to anybody who's not yet noted their birth date, let's just get it here, and then we'll just find out if there's any common birthdays. I feel like this might not be the class, but it's probably just too small of a group for it to come off. Oh, same as Billie Eilish, nice. 25th, Merry Christmas. August 27th, okay, Mateo. October 17th, Preston. Is that it? Who else? Got a few more people, November 27th. All right. Is that everybody? Or am I missing a few? Let's see, 1, 2, 3, 4. Haha, that's funny. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13. There's a couple more people maybe that hadn't told me. Anybody in this class that not yet noted what their birthday is? Feel free to throw it out there, but it seems like we've come to the end of the line. I don't think we're gonna get the same birthday thing. Anyway, though, it is a fun exercise to go through.
I thought better of it. I was like, we only have 20 or less people, so the odds now are not as good as I would have hoped. Well, October 15th and 17th, that is very close. Hey, Big Paul, where are you at? You just left behind? Well, I guess he said in the beginning that he's, doing a phone call, or originally he said something at the beginning about he's like on the phone or whatever. Phone with Oracle for work, yeah. Okay, so not to worry. Well, anyway, guys, we almost had a few. Preston and Jake, you guys are right there. At the end of the day, though, just take my word for it, that when you have a certain sufficient number of people, the odds are much higher than you would have otherwise thought. So whether it's the fortuitous phone call, the common birthday, the gambler's error, just try to have a correct estimation of odds, because otherwise, you'll end up making irrational decisions based on the judgment that something's either likely or less likely to be happening. Eminem, Kimi Räikkönen, October 17th. Okay, so it's a popular birthday. March 17th, my birthday. Who else is born on that day? Billy Corgan from the Smashing Pumpkins. I don't know. Nat King Cole. There's a few other people. Pisces, but I'm not a fan of the horoscopes. I changed my horoscope, actually. So anyways, so after that, there's just discussion of some further types of errors that we can make when we make judgments. Let me see where we're at right now with the class time. Okay, good. I want to talk to you guys about self-fulfilling prophecy next. Okay, so self-fulfilling prophecy, that is, well, one of those situations where you expect something to happen, and you expect it to happen, and because you have this expectation, you start behaving in a certain type of way that leads to it actually happening. That's called a self-fulfilling prophecy. So it is when your expectation of an event somehow ends up causing it to happen in the end. Okay? Oh, no, yeah, it's okay, thanks. So here we go, the definition. So when what you expect ends up causing it to happen. So like, think about a person who, they get into a class, and on the first day, they are thinking, they look at the syllabus, they sort of take measure of the professor, and they're like, man, this class, I really feel like it's not going to go my way. I feel like this is not going to be a class I'm going to succeed in. So on the first day, they have this negative expectation. I expect that I'm going to fail. So if you expect to fail, right, then what do you think you might end up doing on the basis of that expectation? If you think that you're bound to fail, then you're probably going to start acting in a way that's consistent with the expectation. So if you think you'll fail, would you really study and read the book? Would you really go to class all the time? Would you really give it your all and try your best? If you think it's a losing effort, then probably the attitude would be, why would I waste my energy on something that's probably not going to work out anyway? But that means that you're dedicating less energy and attention to it, and you end up failing on the basis of this negative expectation. So you kind of roped yourself in to the bad outcome that you didn't want because of how you expected that result. That's one example. It can be in like an athletic context too, so like you're taking the field of competition in some kind of game or sport, and you have the feeling, this sense that you're not going to win. So if you already have a sense or expectation of loss, then are you going to go the extra mile and give your extra effort and hustle to try and win? Probably not, because why would you put your most 110% effort into it if you expected to fail in the end? So in the end, the lack of full effort prepares you for failure, and then you do fail, and you lose in that case. It can happen in relationships, interpersonal circumstance. Suppose that you're in a relationship with someone and you're starting to get this feeling, I don't think they like me, or I think they may, they don't like me as much. Maybe they're going to break up with me, or the relationship's going to end. If you have this expectation that other person doesn't like you as much, or that they might break up with you, then you might start to withdraw from them emotionally, because you're like, why will I invest so much care and attention in this relationship if I think it's going to ultimately end? But because of that, the other person notices your distance and lack of affection, and then it causes the breakup of the relationship. I don't know, I'm not trying to call you out, but these are just examples that we can talk about. You go to a social event, you're going into it with a negative vibe. You're like, this is going to be a pretty lame event. I don't think anyone's going to like me. I'm not going to like them. So that causes you to be a little standoffish, aloof, and people pick up on that, and then it becomes the exact type of negative and awkward social interaction that you had expected, but simply because you behave in a way consistent with the expectation. And we can even envision examples of larger social circumstances where this can happen, where even more is on the line. So say, for example, you've got a bunch of people in society that all expect the banking system to collapse. So they're worried about the collapse of the stock market. So they're worried about that. Therefore, they all pull out of the stock market, or they go for a run on the banks and take all their money out of the banking system. If they all do this at the same time, then the expectation of financial collapse, which led to their behavior, has actually caused it. If everyone withdraws money from the banks, there's no longer liquidity in the financial sector, and the banking system does collapse. So it's kind of like everyone, it's like mass panic sometimes. That's another case. Everyone thinks that we're going to get crushed unless we get out of this building, and then everyone's trying to do the same thing all at once, which causes them to mass towards the doors and crush each other. Two nations bordering each other, or maybe not even bordering, just nuclear armed nations, expect each other to launch an attack. They're expecting the outbreak of war from the other opponent country. Since they expect that, they start to defensively prepare for the possibility of war, which is perceived by their adversary as preparations for war, and this escalates until such time as the actual war does break out, simply because both sides were expecting it as a possibility. So really, you don't want to enter a situation with irrationally lowered expectations that end up causing you to behave in a way that produces an outcome that you just don't want. Assess the situation using evidence. If there's evidence to show that the thing's not going to work out, then act on the basis of that. But don't supply the impetus for you to fail simply because you expect to fail, lose, or whatever the case may be. Now, with the self-fulfilling prophecy, I sometimes think when I teach it, couldn't there be positive aspects of it in some cases? Like if you expect to win or you expect to succeed, then that sets you up in a course of behavior that would be tend towards a positive result, maybe. But I guess irrational optimism is also not necessarily the best policy. So usually you should just proportion your expectations to what the evidence shows. But don't try to either arm yourself with overly idealistic or pessimistic assumptions, because oftentimes the pessimistic ones could lead to a negative result, and sometimes the positive ones are not borne out by the evidence either. Okay. So there's more for me to say to you guys, but we are getting closer to the end of notes for chapter 4, and so I want to have a full meeting on Tuesday. So I think what I'll do is I'll probably let us end a little early now, and then maybe on Tuesday I'll also bring to the class meeting like a video or something to supplement the remaining notes, because I don't believe it's going to take the whole period on Tuesday to finish chapter 4. But that's okay. We'll just find a way to fill the time. So for now then, I'll just end the meeting, but let me know how you guys are doing. Everything's good. And if you say bye and we're all right and you have no more questions, then I guess we can break for the weekend, and I'll be back with you on Tuesday. So largest crowd I ever played in front of, Noah? I don't know, probably like several thousand. I mean, I played at the OC Observatory, so it was pretty big audience, I guess, on that day. Something like that. Some other big venues up north in Oregon and stuff. Yeah. It's been a while though. There's no performance happening anymore, which is fine, It's fun while it lasted. But maybe we'll get back to it in the next year or so. I'm getting vaccinated on Saturday, the first shot. Like, I don't know if I said that before, but soon I'll be fully vaccinated, and I guess 2 weeks after April 3rd. They say 2 weeks after your second shot, you're good to go around with other vaccinated people, and you can be close to them and stuff. At least, the guidance. Try to get it. I'm sure you will eventually. I think they'll start making doses available for just random citizens by the end of May. But in the first wave, I guess it's educators, food workers, medical people, and stuff like that. Yeah, I don't know. I had pretty good experience with the My Turn website, I guess, just because of my eligibility. You work in food, so shouldn't you be able to get it soon? Well, I guess you'll let us know. But hey, everybody, let me
make sure to check in with you. We should close the meeting whenever you're ready. Well, I mean, Zoom educators for the time being, but we want to be in the physical classroom. So in the fall, hopefully we'll be able to provide that for you guys. Still need to get vaccinated because of work, but location makes it harder to get. Yeah, it's kind of all over the place. I think in Orange County, it's actually a little harder too than where I live in Long Beach. We have our own health department here, and they're very proactive, and they're pretty aggressively rolling out the vaccine. I think they're trying to find every excuse to lump people into whatever broad category they can. So it's not too bad out here right now for the moment. I know a lot of people that I've found that are friends of mine are just getting vaccinated. Cedar City, Utah. I see. Yeah, it just it's not exactly like a uniform distribution rollout yet, but I believe by midsummer, we're probably going to be approaching like 50%. And I think that by the fall we can even get to herd immunity if everyone vaccinates and we don't have too much vaccine skepticism. Yeah, it makes sense, Preston. It's good to have support during these times. But yeah, guys, are we all good? Or if you have other questions or comments, I'm happy with those too. But I do want to close the stream in the next few minutes so that I can start preparing for the 220 class. All right, thanks, Noah, and thanks to all you other guys. I'll let you go for now, but keep reading through chapter 4 if you haven't finished that chapter. It's not too many pages. We'll wrap it up on Tuesday, and then after that, I'll be working with you guys on the midterm review sessions. I'll probably distribute the midterm study guide sometime late in the weekend, so you'll be able to start looking at it, and then we'll focus on it in the meetings after next Tuesday. Okay, so thanks again, everybody. Have a great one, and I'll see you after the weekend. If you need anything, email me. If you need to check on your grades for anything, please let me know. Okay, see you next time. Bye-bye.